Welcome back. You're listening to Real Food Mental Health. My name is Cody Cox. I am your host. And today's guest is a psychotherapist. Now, normally I don't like to have other therapists on my show because typically they claim to be holistic, but they're not. So often when I have other therapists, they will talk about very conventional psychotherapy modalities, which to me is very boring and it also just doesn't align with the theme of this show. Now, my guest today is Tammy Valicenti. She is a licensed clinical social worker, an international psychotherapist, speaker, and podcast guest. Now, the reason I invited her to be on my show is because even though she is drawing from conventional therapies, I like the fact that she actually came up with her own modality that she calls transformation solution. So, with expertise in trauma recovery, she has achieved remarkable success in co-transforming various forms of trauma. Through her engaging podcast interviews and impactful speaking engagements, Tammy offers hope and spreads awareness about how the journey from pain to peace is more achievable than ever imagined. By the way, she gave an excellent TEDx talk. I'll put a link in the show notes to that if you want to check it out. Tammy holds a master's in social work from Columbia University and a bachelor's in psychology from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. During her 25 plus years of clinical experience, Tammy has developed Transformation Solution, a cutting-edge synthesis of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, or EMDR, internal family systems, or IFS, and other evidence-based therapies dubbed, quote, psychotherapy on steroids. This approach accomplishes in weeks or months what conventional psychotherapy achieves in years. Tammy practices modalities she has personally benefited from and invites you to do the same. A quick announcement: I am now licensed in the states of Idaho and Utah to practice mental health counseling or psychotherapy, depending on which term you prefer. And so if you know anybody who lives in Idaho or Utah who might be interested in my holistic and especially my nutrition-based approach to mental health, send them my way. My clinical website is beavercreekwellness.com, or of course you can send them to this podcast. The official website for the podcast is realfoodmentalhealth.com. Now, as a reminder, even if you don't live in Utah or Idaho, I may still be able to see you for nutrition services. So once again, check out my services at beavercreekwellness.com. Welcome to the Real Food Mental Health Podcast, where we explore the powerful connection between mental and physical health. My name is Cody Cox, a holistic nutritional psychotherapist, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to true wellness, mind, body, and spirit. If you're tired of quick fixes and want real solutions that address the root cause, you're in the right place. Let's get started on your path to lasting wellness. Welcome back to Real Food Mental Health. My name is Cody Cox, and today I'm talking with Tammy Valicenti. Hey, Tammy.
Hi, Cody. So good to see you.
So you practice EMDR, but you do it in a slightly different way than what a lot of other therapists would do. So tell us about your approach. You call it Transformation Solutions. What is that?
I do. So originally, I was trained in EMDR maybe 25, 30 years ago. And while that was really effective, I found that in processing, there were some barriers that were in the way or some resistance that was in the way. And I started getting curious about those barriers and really getting to know them. And so I really infused the EMDR protocol with a bit of parts work, which back then was just parts work. And now, these days we really call it IFS. So by kind of flowing from some of the EMDR pieces and using some of the IFS or parts work, I found it to be much more transformative and much more effective. The solution part, which is the solution, is really getting to the heart of things, because when we are clearing away these parts of us that have been holding us back or have been allowing us to stay in patterns that no longer work for us. When those are cleared out, we have more access to our spirit, or our soul, or flow, and I think what IFS would call, self energy.
Mhm. So tell us a little bit more about IFS. It's internal family systems. What's the general idea
Mhm.
behind that?
General idea is that it's family systems therapy kind of flipped inward. Dick Schwartz, who's the founder, discovered that when he was working with folks with eating disorders, he was kind of frustrated in that work using family systems, which he was trained in. And he heard from his patients over and over, well, there's a part of me that wants to binge, but there's really a part of me that doesn't. And so he started asking these parts specific questions as if they were separate from themselves, um, which in fact they are. And then he saw a lot more transformation, a lot of shift, a lot more movement. The idea is that these parts were frozen at specific times in this person's life. Some of them protector parts, some of them harmed, wounded parts. Um, and the frozen parts, once they are accessed and healed and worked with, that there's a real relief and a decrease in symptoms. And when we work with the protector parts and they're able to step back a little bit and allow more self energy, that we feel more confident, more calm, more centered, more at peace, and more in flow.
So what does that look like when you're working with clients using the transformation solution?
Mm. It's a real synthesis of EMDR, IFS, and some other modalities, and really starting where the person is. So, for example, if you came to me because you're experiencing, let's say, panic on a regular basis, or difficulty getting on a plane or a highway, I might start with a target similar to EMDR. We know, what do you see? What are you feeling in your body? What are the emotions that go with it? And then maybe use some bilateral stimulation. And then perhaps there's a part that shows up. And so we might work with that part. For example, I worked with someone years ago who had fear flying, and we did just that. We started with a little bit more of an EMDR protocol. As another memory of part showed up, there was a younger part that experienced some medical trauma, and so we worked with that younger part that experienced the medical trauma and got really close to her. And once we did that, and that part really felt heard and seen, empathized with, and understood, and really we could heal that part and bring her to the present, um, then there was the ability, decrease in symptoms, and real ability to get on the plane.
Wow. And EMDR
Mm.
has been around for a while. So what would you say to the person who's like, well, you have to follow the protocol. It has to be exact.
I would say that you might be missing the boat. Maybe you're missing some magic there, right?
Hmm.
Because by bringing in those different modalities and really bringing myself and my heart and my own self energy in, and playing with it a little bit and allowing for some creativity and some flexibility, I think we allow for something that we maybe didn't anticipate before.
Yeah, I agree. So I practice EMDR too, and I mostly follow the protocol, but sometimes I bounce back and forth between like EFT tapping and like
Hmm.
some other things, mindfulness. I use that a lot with the EMDR that I'm doing. And I found that it actually really helps instead of just doing the nothing but the protocol for an entire session. And so you just have to remember that people are dynamic. And so the therapy should be dynamic too.
I absolutely agree. When you have infused it with meditation and EFT, what have you noticed?
It's very grounding when
Mm,
I use those
mm,
other modalities in as an integration with EMDR. So,
mhm,
for example, like I kind of present EFT as being sort of a mindfulness practice too, because as you're
mhm,
tapping on the body, you are paying attention to what that feels like in the present moment. And
Yeah.
so for
Yeah.
some people, it's kind of interesting. For some people, EMDR doesn't work very well, and I go to EFT, and it's like, boom, they're finally resolving their trauma. But then for other
Mhm.
people, it's just the opposite, where it's like EFT sort of works, but EMDR for some reason works better. And so it's
Mhm.
kind of nice
Mhm.
that I can switch back and forth between those different things because, like I said, people are dynamic and we have to be willing
Mhm.
to make our approach dynamic too so we can meet their individual needs. It's not just a one size fits all solution.
I agree. I agree. And that I think allows for deeper healing, and really being able to meet the client where they are.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Something I do love about EMDR is the somatic part of it, where we're
Mhm.
teaching people to pay attention to the body. Do you do anything different with that, or do you kind of just stick with the general EMDR approach when you're having people check in with the body physically?
So I will do a little bit different work with that. Yes, checking in with the body. Where are you feeling that emotion? And then that's where I bring in some of the parts work as well,
Okay.
because that sensation in your body can be a part that's calling for our attention. And what does that need to show you? I really see it as the doorway in. The symptom is the invitation. And so, what does it want to show you, and what does it want to tell you? And that can lead to other bodily sensations and symptoms. Um, and then really using the again more of the parts work around, well, if we're going in around, say, a younger part who really needs to be heard and seen, well, where are you feeling that part, and what does that part need you to know? I much more than what EMDR provides, the body is really in the room with us, more so. And And I find, I'm sure that you've experienced this as well, because in our culture, I think 90% of the time or even more, we're, neck up and we're analyzing and trying to figure out. And I really encourage people and guide them and gently bring them again back to the body. What does the body want you to know? What is it showing you? And even with something positive, well, I feel a lot of relief. Well, how do you know you feel relief? How's
Hmm.
that showing up in your body? Where is that? What's that experience for you?
It's amazing how the body resonates with the psyche. It's like we
Mhm.
are one. Like I mean that's why I've gone to a very holistic approach in the way that I do psychotherapy because it's like you said, it's very much focused on the brain. But
Mhm.
psychotherapy actually should be about the whole person, and I would even say about the person's environment too, because there's a lot there as well. Um, but the body really holds a lot of that emotion, maybe even all of the emotion. It was said by Eckhart Tolle, emotions are physical manifestations of our thoughts. And so we've got these
Mhm.
physical manifestations that come out as emotions, and they are actually physically in the body. Now, how do we work them out? I mean, some people can do that with exercise, some people can do that with the tapping that I mentioned earlier, but then the
Mhm.
EMDR can do that too. How does that work with you mentioned bilateral
Mhm.
stimulation? For my listeners who don't
Right.
know what that is, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, bilateral stimulation is any stimulation that's back and forth in the body. So for EMDR purposes, it's tones or sounds in your ears back and forth, or it can be tapping on your body from one side to the other. It can be vibrations in your hands, holding buzzers back and forth. Anything that alternates from side to side. And Cody, I would agree with you that emotions are energy, and really, I think a lot of people assume that psychology has something to do with the brain, and there's something wrong with you upstairs, so to speak. But truly, um, anything that someone's struggling with, it might be labeled a mental illness or a mental disorder, um, so to speak, is really a biological and neurobiological issue.
Hmm. There's a lot that's
Yeah.
happening biologically, and so that's why I've gone into
Hmm.
more of the nutrition side of things too, because
Hmm.
the gut and the brain are directly connected. And many of my listeners who have been listening for a while have heard me say that a few times,
Mhm.
where like if
Mhm.
we've got digestive issues, we're going to have brain issues. And so
We
there's a
do.
lot of physical stuff that happens that translate
Mhm.
to what we call mental illness. But I would say
Mhm.
it goes both ways. The thoughts definitely are
Mhm.
something to pay attention to, but then the physical body is an important piece as well.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Have you spoken about the neurotransmitters and the biology of that as it is in the gut and connected to the brain?
Yeah,
Have
here
you
and
gotten
there.
into
So,
that?
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I have mentioned in previous episodes that the gut and the brain are directly connected via the vagus nerve,
Mhm.
and 95% of the neurotransmitters in the body are actually produced in the gut.
Mhm.
Interestingly, 95% of the information traveling between the gut and the brain is actually coming
Mhm.
from the gut and going to the brain, not the other way around. And
Mhm.
I think most people would think, oh, well, all the information comes from the brain, but that's not the
Right.
case here. It's a
Right.
two-way street in many cases, but especially with that gut brain connection.
That makes sense. And so then does the saying, "My gut is telling me." What does your gut say?
Yeah, and so going back to kind of those somatic things with EMDR, one thing that
Mhm.
comes up for me a lot, especially when I'm working with anxiety, is
Mhm.
discomfort in the stomach or in the
Mhm.
gut, right? Like that's one of the most
Mhm.
common physical manifestations of a negative emotion, particularly anxiety or stress. Sometimes
Mhm.
depression, but I think I see depression more like in the chest area. What are
Mhm.
some of the more common areas that you see? Would you say it's mostly kind of the stomach and the chest, or do you see other parts too?
I see mostly stomach, chest, and then a lot in the throat.
Okay.
I work with a lot of sexual assault survivors, and I think and people who have stuffed and held down anger and rage, and so there's a lot of clenching and tightness around the throat, a lot of unsaid and unexpressed words.
Yeah, and I feel like we're kind of inching toward like East Asian medicine here a little bit, where like
Mm-hmm.
particularly in Chinese medicine, they recognize different organs might be stressed with certain traumas. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, you might have liver problems if you feel unsatisfied with your life. I don't know how those
Mm-hmm.
are really connected. I'm not really trained in
Mm-hmm.
Chinese medicine, but
Mm-hmm.
that is something that I've heard that like they look specifically for those kind of traumas and how it relates to different problems with different organs. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, and so as we talk about EMDR, we are addressing more of the mind, but there's definitely a body component there too.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
how exactly does that work? The way I describe it to people is with bilateral stimulation, we're stimulating both hemispheres of the brain. Is there more to it than
Yeah.
that you know of?
I'm not sure that we know enough about the science behind it, but we do know I'll take it a little further. We are stimulating both hemispheres of the brain, similar to REM sleep,
Hmm.
which is rapid eye movement, as you know, when we're moving our eyes back and forth. And it's during REM sleep that we're consolidating emotions and processing memories. So, in EMDR, the bilateral stimulation helps to consolidate memories and process emotions, effectively taking what feels very much present, which would be the trauma, which lives in the body in the present, not fully in the past. So that as we process using the bilateral stimulation, we can firmly put those memories in the past where they're no longer alive in our bodies,
Mm.
where we can say, oh, yeah, I remember how horrible that was, and I remember the aftermath and the months or years of feeling that in my body every time I thought about it. But since doing the EMDR, it's no longer alive. I know that was horrific. I don't feel anymore that it was horrific.
Sometimes
Does that make
people
sense?
come to me and they're like, I'm afraid to do EMDR because I don't want to have my memory wiped. Do you ever
Mm.
get that with your clients? Like they're afraid to do it because they don't want to lose that memory or Like, what do you
I
say to
haven't
them?
heard I haven't heard that. I mean, and as you know, memory does not get wiped. The memory will be there. It just the activation around the memory will no longer be there.
And maybe some people
Um,
actually want their memory wiped too, and I just have to explain to them what we're doing is we're getting rid of the disturbance, not the memory. So even if you
right.
want to forget that, you won't necessarily forget it, but it just won't bother
Mhm.
you anymore. And so that's still a good thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I do find people are afraid of sometimes is they is this they'll ask, is this like hypnosis? Will I recover memories that I don't know about, that I don't want to know about? Um, and for the most part, almost 100% of the time, I would say, no, you don't recover memories. And then there's a very small percentage, I think in the 25 plus years I've been doing this, I would say one or two people, maybe three, have recovered some memories visually that
Mhm.
they hadn't had before. Because as you know, as we're accessing the memories emotionally and physically in the body, if there isn't a visual that goes with it, sometimes that visual will show up.
EMDR is a really weird approach. Like I think for a lot of people, and when I first did it as a client myself, it was like back in the 90s, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I was confused. I wasn't sure I was doing it right, and I found that a lot of my clients are worried that they're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
What do you tell to a client who's like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. My mind keeps wandering. I can't pay attention. What do you say to
Mm-hmm.
them?
I love that you brought that question up because I always say once we start the processing, this is going to feel strange, it's going to feel crazy, it may feel a little weird, and you'll be as you're processing wondering, am I doing this right? This is so awkward. And your brain, your mind will wander to different things, and that is normal. And people do it correctly 100% of the time. It might take a couple of back and forths to really get into the groove, but I haven't seen anyone that hasn't been able to do it and do it quickly.
Yeah, that's kind of my
Mm-hmm.
experience too. I mean, on a rare occasion, I'll run into somebody who's just not benefiting with EMDR. And like I said before, I'll
Mm-hmm.
switch them to EFT or something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in most cases, it just takes a couple of rounds for the brain to get
Mm-hmm.
used to the protocol, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Like it still feels a little bit awkward, seems a little bit
Mm-hmm.
weird, but it starts to
Mm-hmm.
work because you get used to that process of the bilateral stimulation in whatever form that it is. I like to do the tapping on the shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
why, but that's just the one I use the most. I have done the
Mm-hmm.
eye movement before. I have a wand that I'll wave
Mm-hmm.
in front of people's faces.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used the tappers before, or you call them buzzers. I don't have some right
Mm-hmm.
now, and those can be really helpful
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they're just at least the ones that I had before. They were these Bluetooth devices that I would control
Mm-hmm.
with my iPad, and they would just buzz left, right, left, right. Is that kind of what you use, or do you use something else?
Yes, I've used that. I've used a device that kind of looks like what Walkmans used to look like, and it has headphones and buzzers. Um, People will ask to do eye movements, although every time they try it, they much prefer the buzzers or the tapping.
Mm.
Um, and some people will download some bilateral EMDR music and use that, and they prefer that. So it's good to know that all of them are just as effective. It's just a matter of personal preference.
Yeah, yeah, and I've
Hmm.
found that pretty much all of them are pretty close to equally effective because I've tried multiple methods
Hmm.
on the same clients before, and they all
Hmm.
just seem to work. Now, what
Yes.
would you say to
Yes.
the person who just goes on YouTube and they find like there are videos actually where there's like a dot that moves left and right across the screen?
Uh huh.
Would you
Uh huh.
recommend that, or would you say no, definitely see a trained therapist?
I would recommend that if you're thinking about something positive and want to manifest something. For example, I'm building a business and I want to meet X, Y, and Z goals in 3 months. This is what it looks like and feels like to go through the world with this success. Great. Have at it. It's really effective and useful for
So like
that.
a future
Um,
template type thing. Okay.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. But if you're thinking about or interested in processing any trauma on your own, I would say this that for trauma to happen, um, I mean, as you know this, it's not exactly the event itself that creates trauma. It's the event and feeling alone in the event.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you are processing trauma alone, there's a risk that you re-traumatize yourself. And I wouldn't want you to do any harm with that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some of these things that you could do yourself, but I have to agree with you where it's like you're way
Mhm.
better off having a coach, somebody to walk you through it and with that unbiased perspective on the way that you're doing it.
Sure, and where there's connection,
Hmm.
and that connection and that holding that space and container, I think, is invaluable. I mean, you probably know that it's the number one thing that shows positive outcomes in therapy.
Yeah, that therapeutic rapport, so important.
Right. Yeah, it is.
Now, you mentioned the REM stage of sleep, and I've mentioned that I think
Mhm.
on a previous episode about how that's just so important. In my mind earlier, like if I guess it was just a few minutes ago when you mentioned that, but my mind was thinking about how sleep is such a problem for so many people. Would you say
Mhm.
that that's why EMDR is helpful because people are just not sleeping? Like and
I
if I were to turn that around, if we were sleeping well, would we even need EMDR? What do you think?
I love that question. So maybe there'd be less mental health and certainly less health issues if we were sleeping more because of the REM sleep. Interesting. Well, I know there is a positive correlation between EMDR and increased quality of sleep. So I mean, it does because we're processing the traumatic experiences or the anxiety or the difficulties and really diminishing those symptoms, making it easier for us to sleep, less intrusive thoughts, less activation in the body. But I wonder, that question's so interesting to me. I wonder if a lot of it is because we're processing um, what we haven't previously processed because we didn't have that deep sleep.
Hmm. And
That's something to think about.
here's my thought on it too.
Mhm.
I think if we were sleeping well and we went through what we call like a big T trauma, we might still need that extra
Mhm.
therapy.
That makes
Where with
sense.
the little T
Mhm.
traumas, like maybe it's just I got in a fender bender and I'm upset about it.
Mhm.
Your brain should be able
Mhm.
to process that on its own during that REM stage.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And so much of it depends on biology and history also. Like I think about my history, adult child of an alcoholic, growing up in that milieu, in that environment. I was rear-ended a couple of times. That was something that had a huge impact on me, no matter how well I was sleeping. So I wonder because the trauma from the past um, was really coming up around those fender benders for me. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? So it seems like a little T trauma was really touching in on something really big.
Yeah, and that's kind of how EMDR works. I mean, you build these
Mhm.
mental associations, one memory to another. And the way
Mhm.
this is how I was taught in my EFT training, actually, to describe
Mhm.
complex trauma is we're not recording video, so I can't like draw this out for people. But essentially,
Mhm.
I'll draw a table out on my whiteboard and
Mhm.
I'll give it, typically four legs, but I explain sometimes your trauma has more than four legs. And so the
Mhm.
tabletop represents your core issue. So for example, it might
Mhm.
be anxiety. And your legs represent each of the traumatic experiences that you've had to hold up that
Mhm.
core issue of anxiety.
Mhm.
So it might be a
Mhm.
fender bender. It might be getting
Mhm.
verbally abused by your mother when you were a child. It might be
Mhm.
being bullied at school. It might be so many of these different things. Some of these might be little t's. Some of them
Mhm.
might be the big T traumas, but they're all holding up that same table. And so the more
Right.
of those
Right.
legs we can knock out through the processing, the
Mhm.
more the table is going to collapse.
Mhm.
And I like to say we don't necessarily have to knock out all those legs for the table to collapse because the brain
Yes.
builds associations. So
Yes.
so I actually encourage people, like if we're doing EMDR and a person's mind
Mhm.
starts wandering to something that seems totally unrelated, I say, your mind is going that way for a reason. Let's just follow it.
Absolutely. The body knows the way. It definitely knows best.
And so the more we follow those
Mhm.
associations, the more we're knocking out those legs.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Can I use it?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's not mine. Like I said, I was taught that in my EFT training, which was actually it was a pretty similar format to the EMDR training where like it lasted for months at a time and it was pretty intense. But something that I
Interesting.
like about the EMDR training, at least for me, was that we
Mhm.
were doing EMDR on each other. And so we got to
Mhm.
experience it kind of from the client side of things as well as the
Mhm.
practitioner side of things.
Mhm.
And I think it's important for therapists to experience the therapy that they're actually giving their clients. So they know what's going on. They know how to adapt to it to make people as comfortable as they can.
I absolutely agree. And for me, that's how I got to Transformation Solution. I was frustrated by the lack of progress and the lack of changing in patterns and with certain therapies. And I only ask, and I think I can only ask honestly people to do things and journey in a way that I've experienced or done myself. It's more authentic that way,
Hmm.
and I think it's more effective.
Yeah, I agree. So
Hmm.
like I'll do tapping like EFT on myself. I've done
Hmm.
EMDR on myself, even though they say you shouldn't. Um, Generally I won't, but like if it's just a little thing, sometimes I'll do that.
Hmm.
And of course I do all the nutritional stuff that I recommend to people on myself because I,
Hmm.
I want to make sure that I'm practicing what I preach. Not only does it give
Hmm.
me experience, but I think it helps me sharpen my skills.
I agree.
Like it helps
I
me
agree.
give better recommendations and do better therapy.
I agree. You understand the blocks, the pitfalls, the successes
Yeah.
more more deeply.
Now, if a person were to come to you and like say they're just totally dissociative, like maybe
Mhm.
suicidal ideation, dysfunctional, like they can't get up and do things in life, how would you approach that
Mhm.
with EMDR? Or is that would you recommend something else first?
I think something like that, certainly an assessment like anything else. And if it's called for it, and we are doing EMDR, really start with a lot of resourcing,
Hmm.
a lot of grounding, um, and and see how that person responds to that bilateral stimulation and that process. And you know with this work, even with resourcing and grounding, that there are some of the traumas or some of the negative emotions that will show up
Yeah.
anyway. So I think we dip our toe in, again, depending on whether that was the right modality to use and the right place to begin.
Yeah, and
Um,
so many people nowadays are using AI as like this free therapy option.
mhm,
And I think
mhm,
this is why it's so important to have a human therapist, because the human therapist is going to adapt and switch to the resourcing or to the basically mindfulness is resourcing, but to these other
mhm,
modalities according to your needs, where a machine
mhm.
probably isn't going to do that.
I agree. I agree. And there's that, and there is that again, going back to the container and the connection,
Hmm.
where really the effectiveness of the work, that was it's really sort of the foundation of the effectiveness of the work, which is the human connection.
Yeah, that human connection is
Yeah.
so important. Do you find that you can still achieve that connection in virtual sessions?
I have,
Okay.
and I also recognize though that for a lot of clients or for some clients that's it's not as connecting, it's not as intimate. And so for those folks, I would say absolutely follow your gut, and do it in person and what feels best to you. The evidence shows that it is almost as just as effective as in person therapy. Um, I prefer the convenience of it personally. I do my own therapy virtually,
Hmm.
but I think I think really, like I said before, follow your gut. If it's something you prefer, do that.
As a practitioner, I can't decide which one I prefer. Like, I will do
Interesting.
virtual sessions and I will do in person. And
Uh-huh.
for a while, I thought I preferred virtual, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's just because of the pandemic. I just got kind of used to it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned before we started recording, I did my EMDR training during the pandemic. It was like right at the beginning. I think the training was originally supposed to be in person, and then they had to switch it to Zoom at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so they taught us to do EMDR online with people, and
Mm-hmm.
I found that I can establish that connection with people online as well.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
kind of depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. That makes
Sometimes
sense.
people are very distracted. So, for example, I had a client a few months ago who was doing dishes during their therapy session, and I was like, I am not so sure this is going to be effective. um, but but as long as I can get people to use an actual computer and not a smartphone that
Mm-hmm.
they can walk around with,
Mm-hmm.
they're sitting still,
Mm-hmm.
they're staying focused. Generally, I can feel that
Right.
connection happening. But it's that distraction that I think really ruins it. And maybe that's where some of the research is saying that virtual sessions aren't as effective, is because it's more of a distraction.
That makes sense. The really not being in the right frame of mind, in the right space, centered, paying full attention just to this work. And I think really that may be part of what to bring into the session. What is the distraction about? What would it be like to sit down and have this be the only thing you do for this time period? Um, Curious about that for some folks.
Hmm. Well, we're coming up on the end of our recording. What is one thing that you think people should do to change the way they approach health and wellness?
One thing people should do to change how they approach health and wellness. I would say do what you can to get into your body, whether it's cold plunging or moving or taking a moment and a meditation's a big word. People probably think that they have to sit down for a long period of time. How about 30 seconds just doing a body scan? What's happening in my body at this moment?
Hmm.
I think that's one of the biggest things we can do for our health because really our body will show us the way. It'll show us what's right, it will show us what's wrong, and it will show us what's needed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's so much that we could talk more about as far as like the cold plunging and getting into your body. I tell people all the
Hmm.
time, go outside. Stop staring at your
Yes.
screen and hiding in your dark bedroom under your bed covers. Just go outside, move, be part of
Hmm.
this life. It's as
Yes,
soon as we put our minds into the internet, we lose a sense of ourselves, of our
I agree.
identity, of our well-being. And I'm not saying the internet is all bad. I mean, you and I are able to record from across the country using the internet, but we have to be mindful
Hmm.
with it and start using it more as a tool rather than as an escape.
I agree. We are connected to all things. We are nature.
Yeah.
All things are connected to us, and that's the only way for us to stay healthy, to stay in
One
connection.
last thing, if people wanted to work with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on my website at tammyvalicenti.com.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's as simple as that. Okay, I will put a
it is
link in the
simple.
show notes, and thanks for joining me today, Tammy.
Thank you so much, Cody. This was really enjoyable.
I am starting up my small group nutrition program again. So if you are feeling like you need some help getting started on a low carb, keto, or even just a whole food diet in general, this program might be for you. For more information, go to beavercreekwellness.com/restart. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review. That really helps me out. And also subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Real Food Mental Health is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I do not necessarily agree with all of the views shared by guests. The information presented on this podcast is not intended to replace any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While I am a healthcare provider, I am not your provider. Always seek the advice of an appropriate healthcare practitioner with any personal questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast. Reliance on information provided by this podcast is at your own risk.